Hey, what's up, my friends? This is Clint Pascal with the Waters Church, and this is Deeper Dive. Welcome. The Deeper Dive video today connects to a sermon that I preached July the 26th called God is Worthy of Our Obedience, and it was the last one for July. Dude, can you believe that July is over and it's August? Listen, this sermon that I preached is the one in the Cadence series that I've been looking forward to the most. And it's about how God is worthy of us giving him his portion that is his, that belongs to him, that if we don't give it to him, the Bible says that we're robbing from him, and that is the tithe. And at the Waters, we've never been a church that's like nervy and weird about talking about money. The cool thing about God's plan for money is that when you give to God financially, it's not like you're paying for a service. So it's not like a church is like a public television channel where they do those annual drives and then they use those phrases like, don't be a freeloader. You enjoy all this content, make sure that you pay for it. When I give my money to my church, whether it's when I was a little kid growing up at North Richland Hills Baptist Church in Fort Worth, Texas, or when I was going to a church in Shawnee, Oklahoma, or when I was working at a church in Denton, Texas, and Elgin, Oklahoma, by the way, not on your atlas, Elgin, Oklahoma, awesome little town. The reason that I gave my tithe to God is not because I enjoyed the services of the church and paid for them. And it also was not my way of approving of what the church was doing. I didn't say, you know what, we're doing a good job. Here's a little I'm gonna throw your way. If my mindset is I'll give my tithe, that portion that God says belongs to him, out of a sense of approval and paying for a service that the church gave me, well, the question about that whole idea is, where is God in any of that? Am I also paying him because I appreciate how he treated me? Well, what happens when I don't get what I want? And what happens when I pray for something and it doesn't happen? Do I withhold my tithe? See, that's the reason we talked about those two different characters in the book of Joshua. You got Joshua and you got Achan. Okay, Joshua is the one that led the nation of Israel into conquer the land of Canaan. And the very first city that they conquered was the city of Jericho. And what did God say? Joshua, you are to give me, God says, all of the devoted things, all of the resources that are in the city, all of the precious metals. That's not what he said about the other cities. The other cities that he conquered in the land of Canaan, he was like, take those and use those as you see fit and as you want to appropriate those resources among your people. But when it comes to the resources of the very first one, all that stuff belongs to me. And he took that into the treasury of his house of worship. Well, that is so much like what we do as modern day Christians in 2020. When I give my tithe to whatever church I'm a part of, it's not because I'm paying the church because I'm happy about what they're doing. It's because God said, this is mine. So here's the cool thing about God's ways. When he says, hey, this is mine, give that to me, he puts it again into the treasury of the local church. That's how churches function. Now, you may have come from a church before where it was funded by some big other organization or convention or diocese, but that's not the story of all churches. Certainly is not the story of the Waters. We are a church that exists and thrives and survives on the giving of its people. But its people should not be giving because they're happy with the latest sermon or how the seats feel or if the children's ministry is spectacular. They should be giving because God says, hey, this belongs to me. And when you give it to me, I put it into the treasury of the church, and the church itself continues not only to exist, but to keep God's mission going forward and forward and forward. So you got Joshua and you got Achan. I was just talking about those two guys. So Joshua is the one who led with obedience, and he said, God, I'm going to give to you what you said is yours. But Achan did not. Achan said, hey, this stuff is valuable. I want this for myself. He lusted after it, and we can understand why. Because it was amazing and really valuable. And he was thinking, dude, I could do a lot of good. And he probably talked himself into some really cool things that he could do with that money. But it's not even about money. The Joshua attitude and the Achan attitude can also be ways that we approach life, okay? So I started thinking about this in my marriage. Do I have a Joshua attitude towards Tanya or an Achan attitude towards Tanya? If I get a Joshua attitude towards Tanya, then basically I'm gonna be willing to give all. Everything I got, I want to give to her. But if I'm Achan, I'm going to give some and I'm going to hold some back. I'm gonna hold some back. Because, I don't know, people have taken advantage of me before. I'm gonna hold back. So you either give your all or you hold back. Achan, Joshua. What about in your parenting? What about with your children? What about with your friendships? What about with your neighbors in your neighborhood? You give your all where you live, or you kind of hold back? And now all of us are human, and so none of us are going to get any of this stuff perfect. But when you come to standards and templates that I trace my life around, I want it to be Joshua. And it absolutely applies to my giving in my local church, because when I look at that tithe, that 10th portion that we talked about, it's the first of those 10 portions that goes to God so that I can give in faith. And I can say, God, this is yours. I don't want to steal it. I don't want to use your portion to pay my bills. I want you to bless my 90% that remains. I want you to take that 10% and do with it what you want to do. Well, then my attitude towards that 10% is all of it goes. Like all of it. It's yours, God. It's all of it. And guys, I know it's a lot of money. But I get to the end of my year, and I've been doing this ever since I was a young guy. I get to the end of my year and I look back at what I've done and what I got to do. It's pretty exciting to look back and think, man, that's what I got to be a part of doing. So the people that got saved, the people that got discipled, the difference that the church made in the community, I got to be a part of that, man. The biggest difference between the Joshua attitude and the Achan attitude, I think, is fear. So why do I hold back? Why would I hold back on Tanya emotionally? Why would I not be available to her emotionally? Fear. So what does the Bible have to teach me about living with a fear response? Oh my gosh. There's 3 verses I want to give you. One's from Philippians and the other 2 are from the book of Psalms. So let's start with Philippians, okay? Philippians in the New Testament. Paul wrote the book of Philippians, and in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, he says, and this is out of the Voice translation of the Bible. He says, don't be anxious about things. Instead, pray. Pray about everything. He longs to hear your requests. So talk to God about your needs and be thankful for what has come. This is anxiety. I don't know about you, but I get anxious. I get nervous. I get scared. And in those moments, I can either be Joshua or I can be Achan. We all know that Joshua was scared. Are you kidding? Joshua was a military leader going into this ridiculous military campaign against this well-fortified city. And that was just the very first one. But he didn't give in to his fears, all right? He clearly took his anxiety and he said, God, would you please, I need to bring this to you. God loves it when we do that, when we say, God, here's my fears. And the Lord's like, bring that to me. Bring me your fears. Bring them. Bring everything you've got. Bring it. I want to help you with it. I want to lead you through it. Don't pretend like you're okay, because you're not. Okay, so that'd be the Joshua attitude about fear, but the Achan attitude about fear would be, I am anxious, I am nervous. That's my foundation. That's how I live. I'm going to live based on anxiety. I'm going to be a nervous liver. That sounded weird. So the other 2 are from the book of Psalms, okay? So you got Psalm 56, verse 3. You should write that down. And Psalm 94, verse 19. Oh, that one is so good. Let's look at Psalm 56, verse 3. David said, when struck by fear, I let go, depending securely on you, God alone. And isn't that a really good way to put it, man? When struck by fear. Fear strikes me, and normally it sucker punches me, and I never get a chance to block it. So when I am struck by fear, did you hear that? When it strikes me, there's no blocking it. It's going to happen. When I do that, I let go. I don't try to engage that fight and go hand-to-hand combat on this thing. I let go, and I depend securely on God alone. Okay, so that leads into Psalm 94:19. Oh man, Psalm 94:19. When anxiety overtakes me and worries are many, your comfort lightens my soul. I'm going to read that again. When anxiety overtakes me and worries are many, your comfort lightens my soul. Isn't that exactly what we want? It's exactly what I need. I go through stuff all the time that just makes me feel a heaviness and a hopelessness. It brings up nerves and anxiety, and I'm not good enough, and I don't have what it takes for this moment. I felt that a lot during COVID-19 shutdown and quarantine and racial unrest and prejudice all around me, and having to come face to face with my own prejudice. And I get nervous about interactions with people, and I can literally just talk myself into thinking, I don't know what to say, I'm out of here. And just like come up with the grand plan that I just won't engage people. Genius. But instead, by the way, that's Achan. That's the Achan attitude. Now I'm gonna hold back. But the Joshua is, I'm gonna give it to you, God. I'm going to give it to you. Remember that tithe portion? I'm going to give it to you. You do with it what you want. Joshua's like, I'm going to give it to you. And this is what all these verses talk about. Don't be anxious about things, but instead pray to God about everything. When anxiety piles up, God, you are going to lighten my heart. And when struck by fear, I instead am going to let go and not try to engage this thing myself. And I'm going to depend solely upon God to get me through it. May you live your life by the example that Joshua set, and be honest about when you slip into the Achan attitude. God is saying, hey, bring that to me. Bring that to me. Give it all to me. That's my portion. That's what I do. This is how I work. This is how we are supposed to operate together. Don't operate from fear. Instead, operate from trust. Trust in me, God says. Trust in me. Guys, you can trust God in this moment. And remember Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. Remember Psalm 56, verse 3. And remember Psalm 94, verse 19. So much good stuff. Be Joshua, not Achan, and have a lighter soul. See you next time.